Thank you for joining us. I am Felicity Ezewike. There is a nostalgia that comes with hearing the names of legendary leaders like Nelson Mandela, Kwame Nkrumah, and Julius Nyerere. It is nostalgic because it is fading into the annals of history, but still legendary because Africa continues to stand at a crossroad, wanting for brave, intelligent leadership as she confronts the complexities and unprecedented challenges of the 21st century. The question is, where are the leaders who will carry the torch of progress, who will ignite the passions of a new generation, and who will guide us through the treacherous waters of uncertainty? One slot is on a search for new African leadership models. We'll try to examine the cracks in the facade called leadership the continent currently has to define what kind of leadership Africa needs now. Our guest today, we have two guests in one slot today. I'll start with Godwin Vaz, is Culture and Leadership Transformation Consultant. Also joining us is Justin Adelusi-Adeluyi, a leadership consultant. Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to welcome you to One Slot.
Oh, thank you very much. Here. Thank you.
All right, I'll start with you, Godwin. Let's look at what is your eagle's eye view of leadership in Africa today?
Okay, so I have to start by saying it's my first time in Nigeria.
Welcome. I didn't ask you earlier if you've had any of our meals.
Yes. So I'm still recovering, quite spicy.
Welcome to Nigeria. You arrived.
Thank you. Right, immersed into the culture. So being the first time in Nigeria, I have done a lot of work in Kenya and Ethiopia previously. And I'm looking at West Africa, going to more West African countries after this trip. So my eagle-eye view is that there is a lot of chaos and instability. There is I think more and more people are talking about a crisis of leadership. It was part of your introduction as well, where people, I think just before I arrived, there were these protests every day in Nigeria, in your capital, and here in Lagos. So there's unrest, there's turbulence, there's clearly a need for better leadership and more harmony and stability, I think, across the board from all levels of government, business. We're working with youth leaders, community leaders, government and business leaders is what we're targeting. So there's a need, I think, the old model of hierarchical kind of autocratic leadership alone is not enough. We need something more. So I think there's an urgent call, and I'm keen to be here to discuss that with you today.
All right, you're welcome, and I'm hoping we can get some insight from you as well. Let me come to you, and you're here.
Absolutely.
So you have some historical background with what leadership is. Do you think that our history has impacted the kind of leadership we have today?
Okay, from my take, I would say yes, it has. And of course, it's going to play a major role to the future of leadership as well. Unfortunately, the kind of leaders we've had in Nigeria and Africa as a continent have gone below the standard, the power that we actually need to take the continent forward. You know, so basically what I think has happened over the years is we've had leaders who have lacked integrity. We've had leaders who have lacked accountability. We've had leaders who, rather than thinking the long term, are thinking of short term, you know, so they rather want to enrich themselves than have the heart of the masses, you know, in front of them to create the kind of environment that would enable, you know, something that would make the masses have a great and stable economy, you know, to move each nation forward. You know, so yes, it's had a major role that is played over the past few years. And of course, if we can have something much better, you know, in terms of the leadership qualities, I believe Africa shall rise up from where it is today.
Leadership crisis, you talked about that we actually are facing a leadership crisis. Is that your personal view, that there is a leadership crisis in Africa? If yes, how did you arrive? Is it only the conflicts that you see? Is it the protests that we've had in recent times, or you've had this view for quite a while before these events started coming up?
It started for me, I think, tracking Africa a year ago when I was thinking about coming here, and I was then being invited to come here. And I think it's also from speaking to people in Africa. So I said to you, I've got many contacts in Kenya, Ethiopia, and I'm building them here as well. So it's very much the people that I'm talking to. The protests were an evidence of that, of the level of the crisis. But the people I'm talking to, from people's mothers, grandmothers, to political people, to business leaders, really saying there is a massive disconnect from leadership and the people. And when that happens, there's always going to be the hopelessness or anger and rage, which we've seen in the protests.
Let me come back to you, Justin, and ask, how did we get to the point where we now have leaders who are self-centered? In my introduction, I talked about people like Nelson Mandela, who was clearly selfless in his bid to lead the people. We have Kwame and the like. So how did we get to have leaders who think about enriching themselves, who think about people who will fund their egos other than actually serving?
All right, thank you very much. That's a great question. One of the reasons why Godwin is in Nigeria, Africa predominantly, is to transform the mindset of the people in general. Over the years, we've had people, like you've said, who are more interested in fanning their egos, and it's sort of become the norm. When there's no checks, no balances, nobody trying to find out why exactly this is happening, if not for the masses who decide, oh, let's go out for a protest, or let's see how we can change or correct some of these things, it's become the norm. It's become the norm to go into a public office and just go there and enrich yourself, and that has probably become the reason why many of these people have gone there rather than being selfless, like the historians like Kwame Nkrumah and Nelson Mandela. They just go into public office predominantly to enrich themselves. So that's basically how it's come into
Godwin, how do we begin to address that? Because it seems really rooted, and it has been with us for a bit.
The key is finding this, which is why I'm here. It's finding leaders who have the courage to change. Because it'll take a lot of courage to put the ego aside, to try something new, to fail. And even those leaders that are in your government already or business that are not coming from ego, but are coming from service, they are the leaders that we need to meet and work with, really. So you need to build up, you need to try and change the leaders in power, or at least confront. And I think the protests were about that. The second thing is...
But do you see a real a possibility of change? Because let me put this is a favorite topic of mine, because for every conversation we have on one slot, there's always that leadership dynamics that come in. Over the years, across Africa, we seem to recycle leaders. You have them at some point, I'm talking about politically now, at some point you have them as military leaders, and then when there's a transition to democracy, you see them, perpetuating themselves. We just had a recent election in one of these countries where a president is now on his 4th term in office. So how do we do that?
It's breaking the cycle, I think, is what you're asking, right? Yeah. So it's finding, it's answering the question: are leaders born or made? Is really what we're talking about. And my experience is some are born, but leaders are made. Leaders can be developed and encouraged in mindset, emotional change, courage, resilience, all of that. So what's needed, I think, in Africa is leaders with the courage and the skills to change some of the policies, to change some of the structures.
Okay, I think that's actually where I was going to. I lost my train of thought. How do we get leaders that are not from this crop of people?
Yeah, and I'm hearing about the young age of the average Nigerian. So your hope is in the future of Nigeria, like a lot of Africa, is in the young, which could be people in their 20s, in their 30s, in their 40s, that are not coming with all the legacy and heaviness of the historical ordeals that you've been through, right? The limitations of what you've been through. And at the same time, it's giving those young people mentors who are courageous visionary leaders that are already in positions of power, whether it's government or business. So I think it's kind of both. It's like finding if we can find some government or business leaders with the courage to change structures and policies, that's very much the work that I do. The support of them and then cascading that support into a culture change. So for me, it's not just leader. You actually need to change the culture of government, the culture of business, the culture of farmers, which I know
Okay,
is a big
I think
thing.
we'll attempt to define what that culture is.
Let's
I
do
hope
that.
I don't forget. But I want to come to you, Justin, and talk about the recent protests in the
Right.
context of leadership. Looking at what has been going on. For instance, in Kenya, we had that protest, and then we have this one in Nigeria, which some people say hasn't ended, really, if you look at it. Do you see emerging leadership? Because on the one hand, they said there are no leaders, but people were able to organize and come to the streets. People were able to speak and articulate what they want. So what is your thinking about leadership when you look at these protests, and what does that tell you of the future that we should be expecting?
Okay, first and foremost, we would need a rehabilitated mindset, a transformed mind, in order to have emerging leaders, visionary leaders, leaders
When you
with-
say rehabilitated, what do you
to
mean?
transform your mind. You know, we
How
have
do you
this-
transform the mind? Because the reason I ask this kind of questions is because our reality is what you are is a product of your environment as well, and the
Absolutely.
kind of things you assimilate into your
Absolutely.
mind. So how do you begin to rehabilitate? You can take on the question if you wish.
Absolutely.
How
So
do you begin?
I would let him answer that. But
Okay.
as regards to protest, you know, unfortunately in Nigeria we do not organize ourselves to protest. A typical Nigerian would want to take advantage of the protest to destroy public property. A typical Nigerian would want to go about the shops, trying to look for what to loot, trying to endanger other
Okay,
lives.
so I'm not asking you about the typical. I'm asking you what the leadership, what does that tell you about leadership in the context of the organization of the protests?
Okay, so basically, in terms of the organization of the protest, I believe if we can put it together properly, we can have emerging leaders. You know, at the end of the day, they've gotten the message. They've seen that we're tired. They've seen that we're angry. They've seen that we're not satisfied. You know, so what I think we need right now are leaders who would have the interests of the masses at heart.
Okay.
And to have that happen, we need a transformed mind. And
All
that's
right,
why we have
we're still
people
on the
like Godwin coming
transformed
here.
mind.
Mindset.
When you say transformed mind, how do you do that? Because really, we go through a process of growth. We go from the primary to the secondary to the university. For those who don't go to the university, you go to tertiary institution. And in that process, you're schooled, you're educated, you become a particular human. I learned as early as basic psychology that your character is formed when you're about 8.
7 or 8, yes.
Yes, when you're about 8. So how do you change a grown man who is set in his ways?
Yeah, I mean, you have the greatest African example of that in Nelson Mandela, right? Of course it can be done. I've done it with hundreds and thousands of
Nelson
leaders.
Mandela had a track record of always being of service to the people.
Violence first, and then peace,
Okay.
right? That was a big transformation he had in his jail time, of his mind, his heart, his mission. He was a completely transformed man. He was not the leader that Africa could have had and needed if he didn't transform himself. So we've had countless examples of that. We've got people come from nothing in villages in India to the head of their company, a multinational company that I've worked with. And I've seen this countless times, okay? So when you say a transformed mind, it's a few things. It's being able to, it's two things actually at a broad level. So it's firstly giving people the skills to let go of what's no longer serving them or other people. And we call this unlearning. Transformation of the mind is, and of a country and of a company or anything, is 70 to 80% unlearning what's been learned, as this is the way. So you call it the status quo, you call it the one right way. I talked about courage, only a courageous leader will break those rules for something better, not just for the sake of breaking, right?
Absolutely.
It's like Gandhi being thrown off the train and seeing the vision of the British Empire falling, right? That was a vision that transformed his mind. So the first thing is then, and he had to then let go of all of his legal background to be this humble guy that said, we just need to simply stand up to this great power, right, with nonviolent protest. So I think it's unlearning first, and then it's empowerment. You need both. And to me, the unlearning, it seems, is the more powerful thing.
Okay, so when you say unlearning, I want you to be a little bit more specific. What kind of unlearn? What are the things that our leaders need to unlearn for them to manifest better?
Great, great. So let's do a few examples of unlearning. So it's beliefs. So what is the belief that I have, and any leader can ask themselves, what is a belief I have about trying new things, about looking foolish if I fail? My beliefs towards failure. Okay, can I transcend failure for service and learning? Or do I just fear failure, looking bad, and people projecting ill thought towards me? Does that stop me taking risks that Africa needs? So it's my belief systems is the first thing. The second thing is values. Values is what's most important to me as a human. It's my life values. What's most important to me as a leader. And if as a leader what's most important to me is my financial security, I'm not going to be a transformative leader. I'm just going to take care of myself. Okay? If as a leader my number one value is control.
Okay, so sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
As we're talking, I was thinking about some leaders who choose to, away from politics now. We have people like Dangote, for instance, in Nigeria. And some would see him as a leader because he saw a need and he felt that he will surmount all challenges to try and be better. But then again, there are challenges and obstacles that come. So the values might not be skewed, but the reality is that there are forces or challenges that impedes the manifestation of true leadership. In Africa, for instance, corruption is one of that.
Yes.
And then you have people that are not skilled enough to hold certain positions that are holding it. So how do you merge that with,
it's a combination.
when you talk about, values and learning?
Yes, so mindset, what we're talking about is mind, right? Transforming the mind to transform behaviors. But that's only one thing. Then there's skills and knowledge. There's competences that are needed for leadership. It could be negotiation skills, consultation skills, conflict management, influence skills. How do you influence the crowd to trust you? So building trust, safety, and respect. So we call this RQ, relationship intelligence, is a key competency for leadership. I would say that it's
lacking. Can you take that again? Relationship?
Intelligence.
Intelligence.
People talk about EQ. It's not enough. EQ is emotional intelligence, which is great. Yeah. How do I control my anger? Like Justin saying for the protests, how do you protest peacefully rather than ragefully? That's EQ. How do you control your emotions or change them to be constructive? That's the first step. What the next step is, how do I manage my emotions and your emotions so we get a better outcome? If a leader can't do that, people won't follow.
Absolutely.
So our Q is how do I create trust, respect, and safety? And we have sub-skills for those three major pillars of our Q. So greatly, any leader that wants to make a difference, that has a vision, that wants to bring people along to that, you need our Q.
Yeah, I have. There was that relationship intelligence.
I'm
going to probably have you talk a bit more if we have time.
Yes.
Let me come back to you, Justin, and talk about the African youth. What is your thinking as to the skills that are needed for leaders to emerge from our current crop? Because Africa is full of young people.
Absolutely.
And it's not about the future. The future is now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so what are those skills that you think that they need for us to begin to move forward?
Okay, first of all, we need a vision. Leaders have to have a vision, someone who's visionary.
You are African. What should be our vision of leadership in Africa?
Well, to make Africa a robust continent, to make Africa remove us from that third world position where we are and move us up into the first world, we have unlimited resources. And very importantly, we don't have any natural disasters. So it's not like we're going to build and then expect an earthquake or a monsoon to just sweep everything away like it's over there, in the Western world. So with a vision, a proper vision, I believe we'll be able to plan ahead for the long term, for the betterment and the success of the African
Don't lose
continent.
your train of thoughts. We're talking about
The skills that we need. We also need
the young
integrity
people.
and accountability. Very important. If we have leaders who are filled with integrity, leaders who can be accountable, I believe we can be able to vouch for you. You can vouch for
We
yourself.
already have amazing young leaders across the
They're not given the
continent.
opportunity.
Are you given opportunity or you take it?
Yes.
Because as it seems, the people that perpetuate themselves in power, they're not going to just sit aside
back.
and let you take over. Young people are making their voices heard.
Absolutely.
But do you think maybe there's more of a refinement needed of the leadership skills than we don't have them?
Then I think, now we're very big with social media. I believe if you don't have access to just take over the power, you can get your voice heard. Use these digital platforms. Put yourself out there. Like, for instance, myself, if you go to my Instagram, if you go to my Facebook, all I talk about is leadership. All I talk about is a better Nigeria. All I talk about is a better Africa. At some point, these things will speak for themselves.
Okay. We're looking at always at the big picture,
Yes.
at leadership generally.
Yes.
But let's what on an ordinary level, what kind of leadership do you want to provide, and do you think should exemplify leadership in all? It doesn't have to be a big conglomerate. It doesn't have to be about a mind shifting, but I'm talking about at the very basic SME levels.
Right. So a leader with great charisma would be able to carry everybody along. Somebody who has the interests of the masses. Someone who is not self-centered. Someone who is not looking to enrich themselves. Someone who is looking to make things better for the general public. Most of these leaders come on board and they think, once I get into public office, I'm going there to become a billionaire, I'm going there to become a millionaire. If we can rehabilitate our mindset, if we can focus more, spend some more time enriching our minds and building capacity, being more consistent at all of these things, I believe we'd be able to have more emerging youth leaders come out there.
Let me come back to you and talk about leadership culture. You mentioned it and it caught my interest. What do you mean by that?
Could I tag on to Justin
Please
first,
do.
but remind me of this one?
Yes.
I think for the SMEs and the youth, what is needed is entrepreneurial leadership and inspirational leadership, right? So entrepreneurial skills training and competencies and mindset. That how can I add value to the marketplace? What skills are missing? Where are the trends going in society? Because the youth have tools to learn knowledge and skills online. It's all free now. There's so much YouTube training. Universities in the States are offering courses for free. So I think in entrepreneurial leadership skills for SMEs, critical for Africa. It's where is there a gap in my city, in my neighborhood, in my country, that I can start adding value to that gap. So entrepreneurial skills and entrepreneurial leadership, which is about efficiency, high impact, low resources. We always say, it's not about resources, especially in a country like Africa, it's resourcefulness, which is a mindset. Who can I learn from, who can I combine with that has the resources, and I can add my talents to that. Okay, so that's just adding to Justin's
what he
answer.
had to say.
For SME leadership. But ask again.
I'm still going to have you speak on leadership culture, but can everybody be a leader?
No.
Because you have to have the lead as well.
You need the followers.
Yes.
Right? Yes, and I don't think everyone wants to be a leader or should be a leader. But some people have it in them to be a leader. And I find in my work, I do a lot of personal transformation retreats as well for people from various industries and stages of life. And I find that as people transform their minds and hearts and spirits, they naturally become leaders. It's very strange. People give them more responsibility, they listen to more. So there's informal and formal leadership too, right? There's someone with the title, and then there's someone, Bob, Mary, Joe, that people just go to.
Gravitate to.
Because they build trust and safety and respect, and they have this relationship leadership, right? It's not status leadership. It's not role leadership in a hierarchy. It's because they build such good, deep relationships, people follow them. So there's different types of formal and informal. And relationship leadership, I again will say that Africa needs to build trust.
Okay. Initially, I asked about maybe historical or how historical leadership has impacted, has led to what we have. And then I want to go back to that leadership culture you're talking about. We know, of course, that the style that we've had over the years, the decades, have impacted what we have today. So when you talk about leadership culture, what are you looking at, and what are you looking at first?
Okay, so I'm going to answer that in two ways. Okay, so just bear with me just to give a bit of a leadership model that we use that really works. So leadership culture is the norms and values, the standard of leadership that everyone accepts as this is acceptable. This is the way. So it becomes the majority, it becomes accepted. What can be the problem for any system, whether it's a family or a small organization or a large organization or a government, is that culture, when it doesn't work, it leads to things such as dissent, protests, disharmony, and being stuck or revolution. So it'll be either stagnation or revolution. I think in Nigeria at the moment it's revolution. Okay? So it's accepted norms and standards of behavior. That's what culture is. The biggest determinant of culture is the mindset of the top leader. I'll say that again. There are many determinants of culture. History is one, policies and procedures is another. But the biggest, in my experience, and there's research to back it up, the biggest determinant of culture is the mindset, the self-awareness, and the behaviors of the leaders at the top. We know this to be true because you can change the leader of a country, and a country changes in 3 months. Company changes in 3 months. Right? So if you want to change Nigeria or African countries, it's changing the mindset, heart set, and behaviors and choices at the top. Why?
Is that possible? Because I still go back to that question, because I don't want to be sentimental or idealistic. No. Our reality is we recycle leaders, and the methods of leadership have continued to follow similar trajectory. We say, okay, during the elections, everybody comes up and say, I'm going to do this. Yes. This one is renewed hope. The current one we have in Nigeria is renewed hope. In other parts, there are other, but at the end of the day, what we see is same old. Right. So is it really about changing the mindset alone, or basically changing the persons that are there for people who are of more grown mind, whose mindset are ready for actual leadership? That's taking the challenges that come with it and making the tough decisions that are needed.
Again, that depends on let's not use the word mindset, let's use the word awareness and courage of the leader. So you have two choices. You either find leaders that have the awareness, flexibility, and courage, or you grow that. Okay, both can work. And I want to answer this question of does it really, we keep doing the same thing. So I'd like to talk about stages of leadership. You said, we have stages of the human. You go from infant to a baby to infant to teenagehood to adult. So similarly with culture, with leadership as well. So in our experience, cultures move through stages. The first stage is very much a power-based stage, like it's kings in their kingdom. And it's total chaos, right? It can be a lot of violence. The next stage is like meaningful hierarchy, where you need some law and order, okay, just to control the chaos. And then that's not enough. The next stage after that is leadership that is based on efficiency. So it's process-driven leadership. It's efficient, it can get the result, it can generate money and revenue for a company or a country. And I think that's not enough for Africa at the moment either. The next stage after that is supportive and inspirational leadership. How do you know if someone has that? One word, empathy. They have high level of empathy, and they have high level of self-awareness and courage to put their convictions on the line, to put their career on the line. And very much they think win-win-win. I always say win-win is not enough, right? If I sold a gun to a child, that's win-win if I'm a gun seller. The third win is for the system. So supportive leadership, inspirational leadership are always thinking about, is it good for me? Is it good for the other person? Is it good for Nigeria, for example? Or is it good for the community, what I'm doing as a company leader or as a government leader? And I think Nigeria is ready for inspirational leadership. There's a stage after that, which is holistic leadership.
Okay. We'll talk about, let me write it down. We'll talk about the holistic leadership when we come back. Viewers, your discretion, your understanding, please. Okay. We're going to short break now. When we come back, we'll be looking more at how Africa can get the right leadership to get us out of our challenges, or at least begin the process. We'll be right back. Glad to know you're still with us. We're still in search of a new leadership, a brand of leadership that will help us in a real sense and not just figureheads. I have two gentlemen in the studio. Godwin Vaz is a culture and leadership transformation consultant. We also have Justin Adelusi-Adeluyi, a leadership consultant. Before we went on that break, you were speaking on holistic leadership. I'd like you to complete your thoughts there before we move on.
Great, great. Okay, so I talked about the stage before that was the inspirational supportive leader that had the empathy, and we'll talk more about that. The downside, the upside of that level of leadership is that it's very engaging. People trust a supportive, inspirational leader because they're being authentic. So its authenticity is there, genuineness there. It's service-based leadership, not just what's in it for me. It's win-win-win. The downside of that is what creates a holistic leader is that there can be too much empathy, where you start making you start making friends with people too much.
Yeah, we actually talked about it during the break,
yes.
And the fear there is the balance.
Yes, and the holistic leader can do the balance, can make very tough calls, lose people, like lose friends, because in service of a higher conviction. Or not lose friends, but know where to put the boundary of professionalism versus personal, and be okay with making some people be upset with you. Are not approving of you. So there's a very much a strength of conviction in the holistic leader, where there is the ability to be empathic, but there's also the ability to upset people and not take it personally. And holistic means that whatever the situation needs, it's called situational intelligence. I talked about RQ. So situational intelligence means, okay, in this situation, I have to be the hierarchical leader and just make a decision, no consultation. In this situation, I need better processes, policies. Here I need human interaction and connection and rapport. And here I need to let go control and disappear. So there's a lot more flexibility in the holistic leader. That's the difference.
All right, let me, Justin.
Yeah.
From your studies over time, and I know you're invested in improving leadership, are there role models for you here in Africa that you think maybe they have something that we can learn from or gain from?
Yes, absolutely. They don't have to be alive, do they?
No, they don't have
Absolutely.
to.
The likes of, like we've mentioned earlier, Nelson Mandela, the likes of Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, these are people who...
What about in Nigeria?
Well, in Nigeria, we could talk about Pa Anthony Nahoro. We can talk about Obafemi Awolowo. These are people who were filled with empathy. These were people who were not looking to do for themselves, but rather do for the country. All right? My mother would always say, do not look at what the country can do for you, but rather look at what you can do for the country. Many of these leaders of today, they are literally looking at what they can get, what they can gain. That's why you see, I came in late into the political scene because of that fear. People would tell you it's a dirty game. Why is it a dirty game? Because people can kill for it. Why would they kill for it? Because they know once I get into office, I am going there. If I was a millionaire, I automatically become a billionaire. So these are not the role models we're looking for. I was on TV a couple of days ago and they were talking about following the status quo, getting role models. Unfortunately, the youth of today haven't got many role models to look up to. That's one of the reasons and one of the things that twats, the future of leadership. It just literally crumbles it. But when we look at the past, when we look at the history of African leaders, we've had people with great character. We've had people with great vision, people who predominantly have the interests of the masses at the depths of their hearts. So yes, I would say Kwame Nkrumah, I would say Nelson Mandela, And of course, in Nigeria, I would single out Pa Anthony Enahoro.
Okay, so what are the key qualities in their character or lessons that you think they've left behind that we can pick from and expand?
First of all, empathy. First of all, empathy. Second of all, integrity and accountability. And of course, with integrity and accountability comes transparency. All right? If you are a leader with integrity, a leader who can be accountable, you'll be transparent. You haven't got anything to hide. You haven't got anything to hide behind the books. And then, of course, a leader with a vision. If you have a vision at heart, if you have a vision for tomorrow, rather than looking at doing for yourself alone, you think about the bigger picture. Some people in my country, Nigeria, and as it is in many other African countries, would not want for stable power because they want their power generating plant to work. I don't know if you understand what I mean. So rather than allowing the masses to have 24-hour light and power supply, they want their own generator company to make profit. So that's not a visionary leader. So some of these things are lacking in many of our leaders. A leader who's got charisma, a charismatic leader, a leader with great and very high level of relationship intelligence. If you have a high level of relationship intelligence, you're looking at your relationship with your fellow citizens. You're also looking at the relationship amongst the countries. A leader who is great at pulling together collaborative efforts of all the African countries together. It's not a competition. We are one body, we are under the same continent, and I believe we should work together. So some of these qualities are lacking in our leaders of today, and if we can imbibe them, through some sort of transformational, which is why my friend Godwin is here in Africa, predominantly Nigeria, I believe we would have a greater continent.
As much as he is vast, I don't think he has all the answers.
No.
It's impossible for one person to epitomize these things. But you did make some really fair submission, and I would want you, Godwin, to expand on integrity and accountability, because I think in Africa, that is one of our major challenges. We might have leaders who are great, they have some of these leadership qualities, but when it comes to accountability, we seem to fail woefully.
So define accountability for me.
Accountability, being responsible for things that you say you will do, giving account to people. You spend monies for, the most basic is you budget this. Did you actually use it for that purpose? And if you did, can we see evidence that you've done that? So accountability for actions and for decisions taken.
Yes, so I think I'm going to link accountability, which is essential, to the higher reason of why we need accountability in leaders. It's because it builds trust. And lack of accountability damages trust. Okay, so we have a trust formula. One of the key things is reliability, which is linked to accountability, that what you say you're going to do, you do. And what you are doing is as Justin has mentioned a few times, it's in the interests of other stakeholders, not just yourself. So I fully agree that accountability is important, as is integrity. And again, integrity is about, like authenticity, it's the courage to stay true to your word and to stay true to yourself.
Yes.
So I think authenticity is also trusted in any human being, but especially in leaders. So it's integrity, authenticity, and accountability, all three, hugely important. Can they be trained? Yes. If someone has it, they're going to be a good leader, and I can really work with that more. But it also can be learned and trained with good role models, good mentoring, good skill development, mindset change.
Okay, how welcoming do you think the governments and current leadership across Africa are to, focusing on training, learning and unlearning, and, reshaping the minds for them to be better leaders?
Yes, so I think you're going to ask me this question after we visit Abuja. We have some high-level meetings lined up.
Okay.
And I want to emphasize that I'm not here to prescribe, I'm here to understand in this trip. I'm really here to listen to people, right? To understand what the problems are, what the limiting mindsets are, and very importantly, what is the strengths of Nigeria? I'm hearing a lot of complaints. I asked a group before now, I'm hearing a lot of complaints. What's great about being Nigerian and in Nigeria?
So something he said earlier, let me see, just to recap, key skills and lessons. You talked about empathy, integrity, accountability, relationship intelligence, and collaborative efforts, right? So what would you add as somebody who has, studied the act of leadership and can make the suggestion? What would you add to this for the Nigerian context, for instance, because this is where you're at, and you studied a bit about the people and the politics before you came here. You know some of the challenges that this country is facing. So if you were to give advice to the government now, what are these things you would list?
I would definitely say those things are needed. What I would add is relationship intelligence skills building. Okay, and we have programs for this in particular. So I think, a lot of leaders and governments understand strategic leadership. It's to us, and from what I've seen, it's not enough. It's about building trust, building respect with people, with the masses, not only within your government department, but widely with the community of all of Nigeria. So I think the RQ development, I would add to all of this.
Okay. Back to you, Justin.
Yes.
What vision do you have for Africa's future leadership, and how do we ensure it becomes a reality?
Okay, first of all, this new leadership that we speak of, the brand new leadership, is basically a transformative approach that departs from the status quo. Obviously, the paradigms that have failed to achieve sustainable progress. I believe a leader who is filled with inclusivity, who is filled with ethical governance, and of course, a vision that helps to solve the challenges of the modern world, if you understand what I mean. So for the future of Africa, for the future of predominantly my country, Nigeria, I think a leader or leaders who have empathy, a leader who is thinking of the sustainable progress of whatever nation that they're governing, a leader most importantly, who is thinking of the benefit and the progress of the masses. Because you're not coming there for your family, most certainly not. You're not coming there for yourself. You're coming there to represent your country. You're coming there to serve. Most of the people we have in the positions of power in African countries are dictators. It might be, in quotes, a democracy, but the moment we pass through the electoral process and you get into power, it's a different ballgame entirely. Like you've said, many slogans, many promises, many speeches, that are probably written by some very high-level lawyer for you, and then the moment you sit in that position of power, it's a different ballgame entirely. So we need people who can be accountable, people who are going to stick to their word, people whose actions are going to match their promises, people whose hearts are out there for the
people. Godwin, your final thoughts, and what would be one key message you would like African leaders to have, going forward, and if Africa truly needs to push the needle on the quality of life that the people have?
I would leave with two thoughts. My first thing to share is that for Nigeria and African countries in general, as you are progressing, not to lose the cultural essence of who you are. So I've worked in many countries where the modernization made like a loss of cultural identity. And I think that's a disaster. It's too big a loss for the gain of progress. So it's doing both. It's maintaining the best of, first of all, it's getting clear on what is the best of being Nigerian or Kenyan or any country in Africa. It's retaining that and adding a modernization, a progression of leadership and culture. And the second message I would say is that to work on self-transformation. That's the key to changing the leadership in Africa, is work on the transforming. If you are a leader listening to this, work on the transforming of your mind, of your courage, of your convictions, and of your ability to impact other people.
Gentlemen, I think that's a good place to leave it for now. Thank you very much for giving us your time. We appreciate it and the insights you've provided.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
All right.
Thank you so much.
So these are my thoughts. I'm always concerned about leadership. For decades, Africa has been plagued by leaders who prioritize personal gain over people, power over progress, and patronage over performance. The consequences are stark. Stagnant economies, for instance, crumbling infrastructure, and a growing youth population disillusioned with the status quo. Without question, Africa's leadership crisis is a ticking time bomb, fueled by a toxic mix of corruption, complacency, and a glaring lack of vision. But as I say, my guests have shown that it is not all doom and gloom. There are glimmers of hope. A new generation of leaders is emerging, determined to rewrite Africa's narrative. However, for true impact to be felt, Africa needs a radical overhaul of its political systems, prioritizing accountability, transparency, and citizen engagement. Leaders must be seen to be held accountable for their action. Must be seen is key, and citizens must continue to demand more from those who govern them. Conversations on leadership like this is gold. Let's keep having them, knowing that the time for change is now. Africa's future depends totally on it. As always, thank you for watching today's program. Do stay with News Central for more engaging programming. For now, it is bye from me.